Hello, I'm Moran, and this is my letter of advice to the millions of parents currently, bravely, homeschooling their children. Hello, fellow losing my goddamn mind Kateers. How you feeling? No, don't tell me. I know. I know. I feel a great disturbance in the force, as if millions of parental voices are suddenly crying out in terror. Jesus Christ! I don't know how to calculate the circumference of an equilateral triangle. No one does. It's just a myth. Why on earth would anybody even try? What time is it? Only 9:14 a.m. on Monday? Dear Lord in heaven, please let this pandemic be over by, say, 2 p.m, because then it's French, and I know my French accent is an actual hate crime, and I don't want to go to trial. There are very few working parents who weren't already aware that being able to send your children to school from Monday to Friday is generally all that stands between us and a combination of chaos and a total nervous breakdown. We might call this state a nervous chaos down, or just fucking for short. We've all lived through the summer holidays after all, just about. Well, I remember the 17th of July 2010, the first day of the summer holidays that year, when I was at the kitchen table, only to hear the doorbell ring. Opening the front door, I found an amused-looking community policeman who said, "Madam, I just have to ask you, are you aware that there are two children on the second story of your house, pressing their bare bottoms against the window and shouting, 'Holiday, celebrate'?" "They're big Madonna fans," I said, in what I hoped was some kind of pop cultural mitigation. It was 10:43 a.m. In 2020, by way of contrast, it looks like, in the immortal words of Alice Cooper, school's out forever. Although we're all trying to minimise our worry and take one day at a time, it's almost certain that schools won't reopen till autumn at the earliest, and that these next 6 months are going to consist of basically running some kind of child prison, specifically designed to drive everyone inside it absolutely insane. Thankfully, I have some advice. My parents decided in 1986 to homeschool their 5 children, and then they had another 3 children in the next 4 years, which is why I can give you my first piece of advice right now. Get your contraception nailed down now. The biggest lesson in homeschooling is don't let one crazy night in the cider lead to yet another pupil. There are legal limits on classroom sizes. Once you've sealed your reproductive organs into some kind of Tupperware or vault, you will be ready to listen to the rest of my wise advices. The first and most important thing to understand right at the beginning is that recasting yourself as both parent and teacher will lead to cognitive dissonance in your children. What you're going to have to do is trawl your subconscious for an inspiring educational figure and then become that person. I suggest that you announce to your children that, when you're doing lessons with them, you are no longer mum or dad, but Mrs. Crabapple, the semi-alcoholic teacher from The Simpsons instead. With the separation between you as a parent and you as a teacher formalised, you will then be able to allow your children to moan that Mrs. Crabapple was really tetchy today, or Mrs. Crabapple doesn't seem to know that maths have fundamentally changed since 1997, without feeling it personally. This is important, as is also being able to slap off Mrs. Crabapple yourself for letting the kids run riot on a bad day. It also means that you can send Mrs. Crabapple thank you presents of wine at the end of a busy week, which will really, really help. Kids running riot, yes, discipline. All the above advice only works only if your children actually consider having lessons, or have, bizarrely, asked you for lessons. For most kids, however, all of this just feels like a big holiday at the moment. Many will have noticed that trying to convince your children that your front room is a well-equipped comprehensive school with over 2,000 pupils and then just cracking on accordingly is at the moment proving quite difficult. May I offer you a word of advice? Don't bother. If your kids don't want them, don't bother trying to do lessons. Many of you will be saying at this point, "I'm already ahead of you, mate. They've been on their iPads since March the 20th. Others will have a different take, saying, "Already ahead of you, mate. My kids have been on their iPads since the 20th of March, but I feel bad about it." Don't feel bad. When our family started homeschooling, we read an essay by the home education organisation Education Otherwise, who spoke of the phenomenon of de-schooling. It's a wholly natural reaction for children who've suddenly been released from school to just want to abandon all aspects of learning and to, for the first time in their lives, live without targets, assessments, early mornings and schedules. For weeks, maybe months, all they would want to do is nothing but play, FaceTime their friends, put wigs on dogs, and generally engage in what I'm sure John Locke would have referred to in 1693's Some Thoughts on Education as general twatting about, had he had resource to that phrase at that time. Deschooling suggests that you simply let them do this for as long as they wish, because at some point a child's innate desire to learn will just kick back in. Rather than you screaming at them to do bloody BBC GCSE bite-size and giving everyone a nervo, you'll find after a certain point of free-range boredom that kids suddenly start putting together their own magazine or practicing the guitar or disappearing down an internet rabbit hole on Aztec blood sacrifice or attempting a chemistry experiment with baking soda and Coca-Cola, and all without you doing anything at all. You might as well take advantage of this enforced quantum shift in your child's education and just play to its strengths. Every home-educated person that I know, and there are a surprising amount of us out there, you can recognise us at parties from our ability to quote huge, arcane, seemingly random bits of knowledge whilst drinking heavily because we're incredibly socially anxious and not used to being around all these people. Anyway, we will all pay testimony to the fact that we never need deadlines enforcing or targets stated by bosses because we are so used to essentially commissioning ourselves in whatever job we have. So, in a good way, the key thing you need to learn about home education is just give up trying to educate your kids. Seriously. In the end, they will educate themselves because there's nothing else to do. And learning things that you're interested in is actually the most fun that you can have. Hang on. Don't even teach the small ones to read and write, you might be asking. Surely we've got to do that. Guys, just stick the subtitles on Peppa Pig and they'll soon put two and two together. I'm not even joking. My seventh brother, Jimmy, was basically illiterate until he was 11. Then, finally bored by watching Ghostbusters on repeat, he taught himself to read and write, completed his entire education in 5 years flat, and got a 2-1 at Cambridge. I'm really sorry if you're reading this and spent thousands of pounds on private tutors to get your children into Cambridge, but the truth really is that you might actually have been better off letting them sort themselves out and just buying yourself a nice caravan or a racehorse instead. Finally, we're incredibly socially anxious. You might have noticed that phrase. I was anxious that you might, because all people make me anxious, because I lived with only my siblings for company until I was 16, and I never really learned to be around people who have parents or faces radically different from my own. This made many aspects of adolescence very hard, not least general rites of passage stuff like having a school crush. The only school crush that I would have been able to have would have been fancying one of my brothers or fancying one of my sisters if I'd felt like experimenting with my sexuality. There were times when I found myself writing poems about how handsome and noble the dog was. It was a difficult age. This is why absolutely letting your children FaceTime, Snapchat their friends for as long as they want is the best and last most important piece of advice that I can give you. Never, ever interrupt a child that is communicating with a friend. Even if they've been talking in that really annoying, high-pitched voice for 3 hours and saying things like mandem and peng and fam, despite being white middle-class children whose first response on hearing that the supermarkets were being emptied was, "Oh my God, where will we get all our brioche?" Let their impenetrable slang and shrill laughter fill your house whilst you simply pop some earplugs in and finally get on with your work, because they are working too. They are working on bonding with their peers, using humour over their childhood being disrupted by something quite terrifying, and that is probably the most important lesson a child can learn right now. And if you are faced with the most nightmarish of all statements, "Mum, I'm bored," then you can take a leaf out of my mother's book. You need to simply reply, "Brilliant," because there's a lot of housework going begging, and then you hand them a J-cloth and a bucket of warm water. It's amazing how quickly children can actually think of something to do when faced with wiping their own stains off a door handle, or, in my children's case, their own bum marks off a window. Anyway, best of British luck, and take it from me, you have really earned that wine now, Mrs. Crabapple. All my love, Catelyn.